si después tienen alguna pregunta o algo, los buscan por fuera del panel y les preguntan. Y nada, está buenísimo ver que hay un montón de gente, un montón de buena energía, especialmente después de la semana que se vivió, que fue bastante movidita. So, talking about last week, and it was intense to say the least. Well, it was half and half. But anyways, to me, it seems like it shows even more the need that we have to have a regulatory framework in place. So, starting with that, I'm going to introduce you. We have Juan Llanos here, or Argentinian, an OG that has been in space since 2012, and currently is the Chief Compliance Officer at Ripio.
Correct.
We have Doug Hansen. Dax and Lowell are my favorites because we all work at the same firm, have to say it. Dax is a regulatory and transactions attorney. He's a partner in the Perkins Coie that sits in Seattle. Then we have Joaquin Sastre from BitGo. He's the managing director for Latin America. And Lowell Ness, who is a corporate attorney, corporate partner at Perkins Coie in Silicon Valley. So with that, I want to hear what you, Juan, has to say about...
Okay. Who is interested in regulation here? I mean, okay. So what do you expect us to help with? You know, understanding the framework, the complexity, or trying to propose solutions or critique regimes in multiple countries? So there's a lot of things that are floating around, but because we don't know who knows about regulation, how much people know about regulation, I usually like to start explaining a high-level framework for understanding regulation. Of course, this is a very limited framework. It's 3 points, but it helps. It helps in bring complexity down to basic points. So there's basically 3 types of regulation. Of course, arguably, there will be more, but 3. One is stimulative. Regulation or policy that has to do with promoting progress, economic development, attracting tax revenue, attracting businesses, developing, right? And you've seen so much of that happening around the world in the world of crypto, blockchain, right? So jurisdictions, especially innovative jurisdictions, have little to lose and a lot to gain. They tend to promote novel regimes, you know, favorable environments, tax breaks, and all these things. And you can see usually offshore jurisdictions, smaller jurisdictions. So stimulative is one of the main areas of regulation that is important to discuss, right? And it's part of the equation, right? So, and within that, I also include fiscal policy, right? Tax revenue. If you have the right amount, the right equilibrium in tax revenue, you can attract the right amount of companies, the right kind of companies. So it's part of development, basically. The second set of regulation, of sphere of regulation that I usually describe, is prudential regulation, prudence. Operating responsibly as a new industry participant. Obviously, it's about consumer protection, investor protection, market stability, market structure. So, and those types of regulation usually take longer than the initial impetus is to attract businesses, and then eventually there is a development of a framework or the application of an old framework to a new technology or a new set of technologies. So prudential has to do with, anything has to do with investor protection, customer protection, consumer protection. And the third group of regulation, or third sphere, is obviously financial crime and national security. Financial crime, AML, anti-money laundering, the countering the financing of terrorism is also very important. Society has decided that it's important. Comes out from it's actually arguably the most harmonized globally. It comes from the Financial Action Task Force, and it trickles down through legislative processes and then regulatory processes and enforcement. So that is, I think, a framework that helps understand when we talk about, when they listen to the experts talk about regulation, try to put the comments in the different buckets, right? Is this going to stimulate the economy? Is it going to bring business to my country, my jurisdiction? Is it going to be creating a safe and sound environment for the use of the technology and consumer protection? or is it going to also emphasize or promote the prevention of financial crime? And then another thing that I think is helpful, and I'm going to finish with this, is understanding the roles of regulators and the types of regulators around. One of them is policymaking. Policymaking is usually done by Congress, right, or created by Congress. It's the strategy or the decision, the strategic decision about where to go. This is what we want to do. This is how we're going to treat this new technology. This is what we're going to embrace and emphasize. So policymaking is usually done by elected officials, and obviously with the complexity of elected government. And then there is supervision on the part of administrative regulators, which is different from policymaking, completely different. Once the law and the law is made and enforced, and the regulations are enforced, there's nothing you can do about it, generally, right? If the law is in place and there's rule of law, you have to comply with regulation, and there's an administrative set of regulators supervising, overseeing the marketplace. And number 3 is enforcement. Enforcement, I'm sure that word will come out of Lowell's and Dax's mouth now. And enforcement is another weapon that regulators have when obviously there's the stick, right, and the punishment and the sanctions for non-compliance. So that is kind of a framework that I think would help. I hope it will help you.
And that will be good to jump to you, Lowell, because I think that right now we need to consider, multiple jurisdictions, but for good or bad, the US always gets in the middle. So Lowell helps a lot of projects with creating the corporate structure and to choose the path that they need to choose to raise funds, and either if they want to be in the US or not be in the US, because the US has a long-arm jurisdiction, so even when you don't want to be there, you should comply certain things to not be touched by that jurisdiction. So, Lowell, what is your advice for people that want to raise in the US?
Yeah, and I think that it goes beyond just raising in the US. I think there's really 2 problems with this new asset class. One is raising money from investors. The other is selling to users. And even the play-to-earn kind of model in games can be caught up in this. It's sort of an unexpected problem, but you do have to think about the US regulator here. And the US regulator, for whatever reason, has staked out territory that is different from the rest of the world. There's case law that is sort of inescapable, I think, that the SEC in the US has said, look, if you've got US users or you've got US investors, you're going to be subject to our laws. And that comes as a big surprise to a lot of people that are not from the US. It's a very, kind of crazy sort of regime when you're from some other country thinking about, selling products globally. You're not thinking about one particular regulator like the US. But that's the situation I think that everybody is in. The US, generally speaking, treats this new sort of what people call utility tokens, this right to nothing, literally, this cryptocurrency, as both a security and as money. And I think the rest of the world tends to treat it just as money. So 2 very difficult regimes, especially if you're raising money with the token or trying to sell the token to investors. So yeah, you do have to think about US law when you sell tokens even to users.
And that's a good segue to you, Dax, because I feel like everybody thinks of the US and thinks of securities laws, but money transmission has a key role, and the advice on product launch as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on your part of the law.
Sure, absolutely. So any blockchain project, any token project in the United States, I think has to involve a review of securities laws, anti-money laundering, money transmission, commodities, and sanctions. The securities laws are, as you said, get all the attention right now, but we actually in the United States received our very first guidance on cryptocurrencies from our regulator for financial crime. So FinCEN gave us guidance in 2013 about issuing and administering, exchanging any sort of digital asset. right? And you have to register and have to have an anti-money laundering program, like Juan was alluding to on the compliance side, and that's sort of table stakes. But in addition, there are jurisdictions like New York that have a bit license requirement that also imposes quite a few requirements in the safety and sound, sort of the prudential category that Juan was mentioning. In almost every other state, it has a similar law around money transmission, and sometimes that can take a year or more to obtain. So cryptocurrencies usually are monetary value. Things like NFTs probably are not. Stable coins right now are under intense scrutiny in the United States about what it is that's backing it. The Terra Luna meltdown certainly didn't help anything. But people are looking at, is this a dollar that's held in a deposit account with a bank? Are these money markets? Are these treasuries? What's backing it? Or is it algorithmic? So some of that means that we have to look through the securities issues, but we also have to look at the particular regulator. If this is a stable coin issued by a trust company, then there are certain types of backing requirements and how the assets need to be held. If it's a money transmission, there are certain types of permissible investment. So it's a real patchwork. And that's unfortunately the complexity in the United States is that we have 50 different states and we have the federal system, whereas like in the EU or in the UK, we have sort of one regulator that defines these things. We actually have lots of different states, and we actually have the federal and the state system that often are competing with each other. So those are some of the key issues certainly to look at.
Nice. And then Joaquin and I were having kind of like a heated conversation before the panel, because I think that many of us came to the crypto space trying to go away, and I'm going to be polemic here, but trying to go away from the traditional system. And what happened this week or last week, whatever, it felt a lot like the traditional system. So Joaquin works for BitGo, which is the biggest fiduciary custodian in the world, and he gets exposed to many jurisdictions. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that more like multinational level of the regulatory framework.
So the first thing I would say about regulation is that if we have to think and summarize in one single point what regulation should bring us, is protection of customers, right? Final customers. If we can just give one sentence, that would be it, right? I think we are all in agreement to that. The first thing we should understand, and I'm lucky enough to be exposed to regulators around the world, from VARA in Dubai, which is being set up now, ADGM Abu Dhabi, BaFin in Germany, FINMA in Switzerland. We have 2 regulated fiduciary entities in the US.
Advisor
New York,
in MiCA.
through the BIT license, correct. And we operate around the world giving services to governments like the government of El Salvador, large, super regulated institutions. So the first thing we are actually concerned about is that not all regulators are the same. Not all regulations have been conceived in the same way, at least now, today. What this means is, and I'll put a very specific example. If you open an account in a typical crypto/fiat wallet that you can download in your phone easily, upload your ID, and you're done, okay, which is kind of pretty normal for us, right? Opening those type of accounts. What you as a customer should really focus and ask yourself is, okay, where is this company regulated, and what is this regulator requesting from this company in terms of due diligence and basically all the analysis that they do on the company, having healthy books, making sure they run the KYC correctly, etc. And what we're seeing today, generally outside of the US, of course, because the US is just 3 years ahead, is that we're getting platforms telling customers that they're regulated in this Eastern European country, which is nothing more than filling in a registration in a website.
Wait, question there. You say the US is 3 years ahead, and you know I live in the US, so how? Because I feel like we're behind.
Well, we're behind in terms of the usability and use cases we want to give to final clients, but they are not behind in terms of the questions they are asking to clients. Otherwise, these two attorneys here, and I'm a little bit scared of being in the middle of them, they wouldn't have nothing to do, actually, right? That's why they are here. That's why their job is meaningful, right? Because they have to navigate all that part. But the basics, what a Big Four auditing company will be asking to their clients are good questions, questions that really protect clients. Taking the example we're living today, or in the last few days with FTX, who everyone kind of thought was a top-tier company, super secure, et cetera, well, guess what? The regulator that was apparently regulated them, and I'm not going to say any names, I don't want any problems, but the regulator asking questions to them was not stringent enough. They were not making the right questions and asking the right questions on a 3 months basis, 6 months basis. And this is what's happening today. You open as a normal retail customer, you're opening accounts, seeing a banner in your platform saying, hey, I'm regulated in whatever jurisdiction. What you should be really asking is, okay, what is this regulator in this jurisdiction really asking this platform about? The second big component, in my opinion, so the first one is asking ourselves, okay, what kind of really regulation is this in this jurisdiction? The second one, in my opinion, and the opinion of course, the company I work for, we are the largest digital asset custodian in the world, is that not all custodies are made the same, okay? There's a concept we have been playing around with too much in this industry, and I've been working in the industry for nearly 8 years. I built the first fiduciary regulated custodian in the world for digital assets, actually based here in Buenos Aires. It was called SAPO. There are a lot of ex-SAPO employees here. We got the first fiduciary custodian in Switzerland, so we actually helped the regulator put together the questions that they really had to ask others and ourselves. And this concept of fiduciary custodian would have actually prevented in a big extent what has happened with the FTX. And the reason is very simple. When you safeguard assets with a third-party fiduciary, and this word is very important, we take it for granted and we just play with it in this industry, in my opinion, that gives absolute protection of the assets for the final client. The final client doesn't have to rely on their service provider to hold those assets. So the situation here in the crypto market, because it has not been correctly regulated until today, is that all the market structure that we had, that we have in TradFi with exchanges or liquidity providers in one side, then brokers in the other side, then clearing houses in the other side for settlement, and then custodians, has just been pushed into one single thing in exchanges or wallet providers or basically the app you download, okay? That is a huge risk. You have to rely on the word of one person, in other words, the CEO of that company, right? So when you use a third-party custodian, and I'll finish
No,
quickly.
he wants.
When you use a third-party custodian, this risk disappears. The CEO of this company that we're talking about these days couldn't have moved assets from fiduciary regulated custody wallets to subsidize a business that was not working. Full stop. This is a very important concept. And by the way, we can keep on talking about Web 3, Web 5.0, or Web 15.0. Until this is not resolved, there will not be real adoption. Real asset managers, ETFs, etc., won't happen, and we won't have Bitcoin at $1 million whatsoever. It's not happening.
That's the Wednesdays.
Okay?
Put in your head that number.
Correct.
Can I riff off of that for just a minute? Two things that you said there. One is, I think it's important just to note that, like, assets aren't necessarily regulated. It's activities that are regulated, right? And in this area, the types of of activities that are regulated are like selling investments, like fundraising, custodying assets, transmitting assets, issuing new payment instruments, right? Or providing some sort of leverage or something else, right? And so if you're engaged in those activities, and in your example, there were many areas of
commingling activities, no?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, so like just that concept of custody, right? Like that is the basic thing that is typically regulated if there's a third party. And I think we all want those types of protections. I mean, that's kind of the social contract, right? If there's a third party. But the other issue I wanted to raise just real quickly was DeFi, right? And decentralization and peer-to-peer. And in many situations, we have these applications, these protocols that are performing functions that a third-party intermediary historically has, right? And so the really interesting questions that I'm seeing these days are related, like how do governments and policymakers and everybody else deal with decentralized applications when all of our laws and rules and expectations are built around a centralized model with a custodian. And so things like the Uki DAO actions and Tornado Cash, right, where the regulators are just basically grappling with like some sort of unassociated organization, tagging all of the participants in a DAO, putting the smart contract addresses on the designated parties list, right? These are the things that we are working through, and it's going to be messy for quite a while in this situation.
I agree, and we were also...
I think Juan has a comment.
Yeah, I want to take it up to the higher level of abstraction. And so there's so many things that Joaquin said I would challenge. I would like to agree to disagree, but we don't have the time, 6 minutes. So, I think what we need to do, what I've been trying to advocate for a few years now, is to start rethinking, redesigning regulation for the 21st century. We are bogged down in the details, and of course, it's written regulation about custody, and we have to protect assets, and we have these systems to shard the keys and cold storage and all these things that are new, that are applicable to the new technology. But I think that the general principles, when we operate in a multi-country environment like Ripio or formerly in Binance and other companies, I mean, operating in 40, 50 countries, 60 countries, 70 countries, 7 countries now with Ripio, you have to find the first principles or focus on principles and focus on the spirit of the law, right? And focus on protecting and creating transparency, everything that has to do with prudential aspects, work on the checklist of things that need to happen, even though there's no regulation written for the industry yet, or for the asset yet, right? And then, of course, there's this global regime applying to all companies about financial crime prevention. We do that also. But I think we should start pushing regulators to start thinking about redesigning regulation for the 21st century. Regulation today is incompatible, and you gave an example, Joaquin. So if you look at the regulations for securities in the US, and I'm going to let the experts talk about it, but it's designed for multiple intermediaries, for a long supply chain that has the issuer, the transfer agent, the clearing agent, the trading venue, the National Security Exchange, or whatever. So there's a set of very onerous regulations for each of the participants. And then when you do atomic swaps, all of those things are eliminated. Custody is automatic, and it's there by design. There's a special kind of custody or storage, if you will, of the asset. And then the clearing and there's no counterparty risk. So you don't have to rely on a third party or an intermediary. So why are we still applying those regulations to these new technologies or these new networks? Those things have to be rethought, and I think that I don't like getting bogged down in details, and I'd like for us to have a higher level conversation about that.
So we have 3.5 minutes. So I'll let you each do your final remarks and hopefully say what you think it's obvious that we need regulation, whether you like it or not. So what's going to happen, like with the US?
Yeah, look, I think in the U.S., if you're raising money with crypto, you're probably selling a security, certainly from the regulator's point of view, so you need to think about how to do that in a compliant way. And even if you're not selling to U.S. people, there are actual rules in the U.S. for how to not sell to U.S. people in order to get an actual exemption from U.S. securities laws. So there's a specific way to do it. There are marketing requirements which can be easy to trip up in this day and age of social media. And so there's things that you probably do need to think about. The U.S. has put itself in this position of regulating something that no one else is regulating.
Very paternalistic in my view, but obviously necessary.
Right.
I think we have to come to a point to self-regulate ourselves and create some international or national bodies to regulate ourselves where these are big players, right, where the real risk is, if we want to be pragmatic. We have to come together and put together a framework with essential norms and just follow them. And if you're not tied to it and you don't agree with it, I'm sorry, we cannot do business with you.
Now, bringing it to reality, because if not everything sounds out, MiCA is coming out.
Yeah, it's great. They just postponed the last approval
But the
for
content,
4 months.
because
So
I'm not familiar.
for me, the question is, in terms of the details, MiCA has gone very deep into regulating what is what, okay, in terms of this type of token, what do we do with it? Is it, e-money? It is not. What do we do with that? And they basically segregated and did a catalog of all that and what requirements you should have to comply with to issue, for example. My question is, what are we doing until MiCA is here in Europe, right? What are we doing in the next 2 years? Are we having 3, 4, 5 more FTXs? We will.
I don't think we have enough of those to have so many.
Well, there's still a list of the top 10 exchanges, no? And that list will be there forever, no? If this industry continues alive. So I think the question is, what do we do in the next 2 years while the regulators, as Juan was saying, figure out how to re-regulate all these new things?
Maybe two quick thoughts. One is we got to find a balance between regulation and innovation. Yes. And in some of these unregulated jurisdictions, less regulated jurisdictions, you have these, things that happen this week, right? But you may not even be able to get off the ground in more regulated jurisdictions. And so finding that balance is really useful. The other thing I'll just say is that these are internet-based protocols. These are, by definition, international. But what people, I think, it would be helpful people keep in mind is that even
Thank you for putting up, and you'll need it.
Muchas gracias. Wait. So, as I said, yes, at 7 o'clock we will be discussing with Vitalik, Samson, Jimmy Song, yes, and Lowell. Who's Lowell here?
Lowell.
Yep. Lowell, would you like to join at 7, a bonus track?
Wow, what an invitation in public.
About what's happening with FTX?
Why him?
Sure.
Okay, and Lowell also on stage, bonus track, yes, about what's happening with FTX. So join us also. Thank you. Bye-bye.